Hello lovers of Westeros, I'm Ashley of Naath, and today I will be presenting you with a video covering the Grey Girl on the Dying Horse vision from the books, in addition to raising the possibility that this vision may not have come to pass. So if you want to hear about the girl as grey as ash from Melisandre's flames, you're in the right place, just keep watching. The Grey Girl's first reference occurs in A Dance with Dragons. In Jon 6, Jon goes for a midnight stroll and encounters Melisandre. Melisandre senses Jon's despair over the news that the Boltons had Arya and were marrying her to Ramsay, and she tells him not to worry that his sister wasn't lost to him. Mel then tells Jon, "I have seen your sister in my fires, fleeing from this marriage they have made for her, coming here to you. A girl in grey on a dying horse, I have seen it plain as day. It has not happened yet, but it will." A short time later, in Melisandre 1, as Mel is searching the flames for the girl again so she can give Jon more information, she thinks the following. She had seen the girl only once, a girl as grey as ash, and even as I watched, she crumbled and blew away. This mysterious girl comes up a third time when Melisandre recruits Mance Rayder to go and rescue, quote, the girl in grey on a dying horse, Jon Snow's sister. After identifying her with that statement to Mance, Mel thinks the following to herself. Who else could it be? She was racing to him for protection, that much Melisandre had seen clearly. Who else indeed, but we'll get to that momentarily. I gave these three references to emphasize a few things. 1. The girl is in grey. It's safe to assume that Melisandre knows what the color grey is and that she sees the color grey in the vision, presumably from the girl's clothing, though another interpretation is certainly applicable. Fingers crossed it's not that. The next two details are where it gets fuzzy. The second detail is that the Grey Girl was escaping a marriage. The third is that this girl is Jon's sister. We aren't told how Melisandre knows this, it's just her interpretation. Which brings us back to Melisandre's question, who else could it be? I think we should look at all of the likely candidates and see how well they hold up to our criteria. First, that said girl is in grey. Second, said girl is fleeing a marriage. And third, said girl is Jon Snow's sister. The most obvious and probably most accepted person who fulfills the Grey Girl vision is Alyce Karstark. In A Dance with Dragons, Jon 9, Alyce was found 2 leagues south of Molestown. The Watch brothers brought Alyce back to the wall, where she asks to see Jon. As Molly wakes Jon and informs him of the situation, Molly says the following. She came alone. Her horse was dying under her. All skin and ribs it was, lame and lathered. They cut it loose and took the girl for questioning. When Jon goes to meet this girl he believes to be Arya, he enters Maester Aemon's old chambers. He steps over, quote, a puddle of damp clothing and sees the girl sleeping by the fireplace and notes she was wrapped in a black woolen cloak 3 times her size. The girl wakes soon after Jon enters the room, and Jon learns this is not his sister, but Alyce Karstark. Jon thinks Alyce looked enough like Arya to give him pause, but only for a moment because Alyce is too old to be Arya. But their hair and eyes were the same color. Anyways, Alyce goes on to explain that her great-uncle is planning to force Alyce to marry his son to steal her birthright to Carhold. Her brother Harry is the rightful heir, though he's held prisoner at Maidenpool and nobody has heard of him in a year. So, for all intents and purposes, Alyce is the heir as daughters come before uncles in the line of succession. So, Carhold is hers. But if her uncle marries his son to Alyce and his son gets Alyce pregnant, once the child is born, Carhold is theirs, and her cousin can dispose of her just as he did his previous wives. 2 of them, as a matter of fact. After explaining this to Jon, Alyce says, "You are my only hope, Lord Snow. In your father's name, I beg you, protect me." Based off that backstory, we can see a few things. Alyce absolutely was coming to Jon for protection. Hell, she outright begged Jon to protect her. The need for protection was something Melisandre claimed to have saw clearly. So this part of the Grey Girl vision holds up, as does the part about fleeing from a marriage. Alyce was fleeing from an arranged marriage to her cousin Cregan, and Mel told John the gray girl was fleeing from a marriage that was made for her. Also, Alice was discovered on a dying horse, which was another detail Mel garnered from the flames. So far, I gotta admit, Alice is looking good for the gray girl. However, her candidacy isn't one without objections. First, Alice is not John's sister. House Karstark is a cadet branch of House Stark, but at this point, the relation is so distant, John wouldn't even call her cousin. So why did Mel assume this was John's sister, as opposed to just a girl? John notes that Alice and Arya have the same hair color and eye color, but Melisandre never describes the gray girl's physical appearance. So we can't say for certain it was the gray girl's looks that led Mel to conclude sister. Most likely, Mel jumped to the wrong conclusion because of the letter John got informing him of Arya and Ramsay's impending nuptials. But still, Mel never confirms this either, so I'm still left wondering what made Melisandre so sure this was John's sister. The second objection, and arguably the most important, is Alice's attire. At no point is she noted to be wearing gray. In fact, in the short time John is around her, he notes twice that Alice is wearing black. The first time when he sees her, John notes her black cloak to be 3 times her size. The second time, when she knelt to beg for his help, John notes that Alice clutched her black cloak. This is pretty significant because the gray aspect of the vision is a detail that Melisandre notes every time she mentions the vision. And it's arguably the easiest detail Mel could have got from the vision. So for Alice never to be wearing gray, I have to think Martin is trying to tell us something. Because these 2 objections, Alice not being John's sister and Alice not being said to wear gray, are pretty significant, I'm left thinking Alice is not the gray girl from Melisandre's flames. She was just a happy coincidence and a crafty distraction from George. Also, in A Song of Ice and Fire, the obvious answer never seems to be the correct one. So, if not Alice Karstark, then who? Perhaps we should next take a look at Ramsay's bride, Arya. Well, let's call her faux Arya. Actually, let's just call her Jane because that's her real name. In the books, the Boltons are attempting to fraudulently cement their hold on the North by marrying Ramsay to Ned Stark's daughter, only it's not really Ned Stark's daughter. It's Jane Poole, Sansa's childhood best friend, and the Boltons are calling her Arya. We can surmise that Jane is who Melisandre thought she saw in the Grey Girl vision as Mel sent Mance to rescue her from Winterfell. When this rescue attempt occurs, the spearwives Mance brought gathered with Reek, and Reek notices the following. When Squirrel returned, the other 4 were with her. Clad as serving girls in layers of drab gray rough spun, they wore brown woolen cloaks lined with white rabbit fur. The plan was to smuggle Jane out of her room by posing as servants and washerwomen come to give Lady Arya her bath. 6 would enter and 6 would go out. One of the spearwives would swap places with Jane, and Jane, disguised as a washerwoman, would leave with Reek and the others. And the spearwife that was posing as Arya would later escape through a window and go down into the Godswood and get out that way. Once the group got into Jane's room, Theon and Rowan, one of the spearwives, helped Jane into Squirrel the spearwife's clothes, and they were off. Once they got to the middle of the courtyard, Theon, Jane, and 2 spearwives went to the battlements, and the 2 other spearwives split off to go get Mance. Theon's group makes it to Winterfell's outer wall battlement, but by then guards are after them, the spearwives go down, and left with no choice, Theon and Jane jump off the wall. A time later, in Stannis Baratheon's camp, Asha Greyjoy is wandering about looking for Sir Justin Massey. Instead, she encounters Clayton Suggs, one of Queen Selyse's men who chose not to remain at the wall with Selyse but to go with Stannis. Sir Clayton starts harassing Asha, and in the midst of the conversation, Asha hears horses approaching the camp. The riders come on them, and Asha notes they looked like, quote, a troop of wraiths, big men on small horses, made even bigger by the bulky furs they wore. She also notes that there were maybe a score of them, and 2 were all black. As it turns out, this was Tycho Nestoris' escort, comprised of a few Night's Watch brothers and freed Ironborn prisoners from Deepwood Motte. Once Tycho figures out who Asha is, he tells her that he has a gift for her that was found beneath the walls of Winterfell. Asha looked at the gift, thinking, a girl and an old man. The girl was shivering violently even in her furs. If she had not been so frightened, she might have even been pretty, though the tip of her nose was black with frostbite. The old man interrupts Asha's thoughts, calls her sister, and Asha realizes that this is Theon. We can therefore deduce that the girl with him is Jane, or faux Arya, or whatever you want to call her. So their escape was successful. And according to a Winds of Winter sample chapter, we know Stannis will decide to send Jane, whom he thinks is Arya, to the Wall to reunite with Jon. But we don't know more details aside from her escort will contain 6 men, Tycho Nestoris and Sir Justin Massey. As we did with Alice Karstark, we should now examine Jane's situation and see what jives with Melisandre's vision and what doesn't. One of the big details Melisandre emphasizes when she talks about the Grey Girl vision is that the girl is Jon's sister. While Jane is not Jon's sister, she is being forced to pose as such. So I won't hold this technicality against Melisandre if this turns out to be who she saw in the flames. Unfortunately, that's about all of Jane's story that meshes with the Grey Girl vision. Something Mel claims is that the Grey Girl was fleeing a marriage and coming to Jon for protection. The seeking protection part, Mel tells herself she saw clearly. Jane was fleeing her marriage to Ramsay, so that holds up, but she wasn't fleeing to Jon for his protection. Jane fled to Stannis. So that part is all the way wrong. However, in Winds of Winter, Stannis does send Jane to the Wall to reunite with Jon. Though Jane doesn't go alone, so you would think that it may not be her at that time either because Mel only saw one person in her vision, whereas Jane at this time will have a group of other people with her. Anyway, one could also say that Jane's journey to the Wall would be continued fleeing from Ramsay, and once at the Wall, Jane would be under Jon's protection. So in a roundabout way, the Winds of Winter portion of Jane's story could end up jiving with the Grey Girl vision. We just don't know at this point. Melisandre had said the Grey Girl would be on a dying horse. When Asha sees Tycho Nestoris' escort, she notes that the horses looked small. Asha thinks nothing of them appearing to be dying. On top of that, Asha doesn't note Jane to ever be on a horse. Asha only sees Jane once Jane was pushed with Theon into the snow at her feet. As was the case previously, it is possible that in Winds of Winter, when Stannis sends Jane to the Wall, she might ride a dying horse. But I doubt that very much, because if Stannis truly wanted Jane to get to the Wall, why would he send her there on a dying horse? The most obvious disconnection between Jane and the Grey Girl vision is the absence of the color gray. Now, I did note that before springing Jane, the Spearwives and Theon gathered themselves to prepare, and Theon sees they were, quote, clad as serving girls in layers of drab gray rough spun. But he also notes they wore, quote, brown woolen cloaks lined with white rabbit fur. Then later, when Jane is presented to Asha, Asha doesn't note anything of clothing color. She just observes that the girl was shivering violently even in her furs. In fact, the only color noted by Asha was the tip of Jane's nose that was black with frostbite. So even though Jane was wearing gray, she had a thick brown cloak over it. So if Jane is who Melisandre saw, it stands to reason Mel would have seen Jane's brown cloak lined with white rabbit fur, not the drab gray rough spun underneath the cloak. Overall, there are just too many colors here associated with Jane. Gray rough spun, brown cloak, white rabbit fur, black frostbitten nose. Too many colors for me to feel confident that this is the girl as gray as ash Melisandre saw. Now, perhaps since Alice and Jane are not John's sisters, we should ask ourselves, could the Grey Girl be one of John's actual sisters? I'm going to immediately rule Arya out. The last we see of her, she's still in Braavos training to be a faceless man, and quite successfully at that. So it doesn't appear that she'll be leaving anytime soon, nor will Arya be in a position to have to flee a marriage. Sansa, however, is. The last we see of her, Sansa recently departed the Eyrie for the Gates of the Moon. Here, Lord Baelish reveals his plan to Sansa, in which she will marry the heir to the Vale of Arryn, Sir Harold Harding. Sansa's true identity will then be revealed to the Lords of the Vale, and they will help Sansa reclaim Winterfell in her name. Sansa is seemingly in on this because, according to a Winds of Winter sample chapter, she has attorneys staged under the pretense of looking for men to form a guard to protect Robert Arryn. But in reality, this was just a way for Sansa to meet her betrothed, Harold Harding, who had been recently knighted. Sansa takes Lord Baelish's plan a step further by following his suggestion to seduce Sir Harold. Now, I say all of this to say that Sansa most likely won't flee the situation, as she seems a very willing and active participant. So I don't see her being the Grey Girl either. She's literally in the safest place she could be, so there's no need for Sansa to flee to Jon for his protection. Not to mention the escape would be impractical, as she'd have to pass through the Mountains of the Moon by herself, or, as Ned did during Robert's rebellion, sail her way back north. Either way would be nearly impossible, especially for her. Normally, I wouldn't do a video like this and not make a definitive choice, but this one leaves me stumped. There's no one person I like for the Grey Girl, at least not yet. So I turn this over to you all. Let me know who you think the Grey Girl is and why. Alice, Jane, Sansa, Arya, or someone else? Or is this vision even going to happen? I personally think that it will. I just think it hasn't happened yet, and I don't have enough information to say that it has. And here is where I leave you. I'm Ashley of Naath. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and join my Khalasar. To all of my Blood Riders, my current Khalasar, and anyone else watching, I hope you have a wonderful day, and from me to you, 7 blessings, friends.